Legends are like quiet rivers, flowing through the memory of people long after the first voices that told them have faded away. Some are fierce, others gentle, but all carry within them a reflection of the fears, hopes, and mysteries of those who lived before us. Tonight we continue our slow journey into these forgotten landscapes, where myth and history softly overlap. In the far mountains and graveyards of Japan, there are whispers of a being made not of flesh but of bone. The Gashotakuro, a towering skeleton giant, is said to wander in silence, almost invisible, until its hollow gaze falls upon the unwary. It is not just a creature, but a memory of famine, of loss, and of restless hunger that outlived the people who suffered it. From the jungles of the ancient Maya, another shadow spreads its wings. Kamazush, the bat god, lord of the twilight caves. Its figure looms between deity and monster, a reminder of the deep respect and fear people held for the night and the creatures that thrived within it. To the Mayans, bats were not merely animals. They were guides between the world of the living and the underworld. Far across oceans, beneath the southern stars of Australia, lives a tale of water and unease. The bunyip, dwelling in billabongs and swamps, was described in many ways, sometimes as dog-like, sometimes as seal-like, always strange and unsettling. Its glowing eyes are said to rise from dark waters when the night is at its stillest. Perhaps it was a warning to children not to stray too close to the riversides, or perhaps it was something more, something only the elders knew. Along the winding rivers of the Amazon, a softer yet no less mysterious story takes shape. The Incantado, the Enchanted One, shifting between the form of a person and that of the pink river dolphin. At times playful, at times sorrowful, these beings carried both beauty and unease. They remind us that water is not just a source of life, but also a place of transformation and secrets too deep for human eyes. And in the caverns of South Africa, older than history, coils the Grootslang, part serpent, part elephant, a creature born when the gods themselves made an error. Legends say it guards gemstones and treasures, but its true wealth lies in its age, for it is said to be among the oldest of the earth's guardians. Its story speaks of greed, of danger, but also of a reverence for the ancient forces that shaped the land. These 5 beings, scattered across time and geography, never truly meet in any tale. Yet tonight, in the quiet of imagination, we will bring them together, not to fear them, but to listen. For each carries a piece of the human story, our awe, our warnings, and our longing to explain what lies just beyond the reach of sight. Some stories rise like mist from forgotten rivers. Others linger like shadows in caves, or echo through the silence of mountains. Tonight we drift gently into a realm where giants made of bone walk unseen through the fog, where a bat god spreads its wings in the darkness of ancient stone, and where eyes like embers watch from still waters under the stars. In the heart of the Amazon, shapes shift between human and dolphin, carrying whispers of the river. Far away, in the deep gorges of Africa, something older than memory coils in the rocks, part serpent, part elephant, and all mystery. We will not chase them. We will simply walk slowly along the quiet paths of legend, pausing to notice their shapes as one might notice a cloud drifting past the moon. In the Scottish Highlands, water does not simply run. It gathers in dark, still pools between the hills, winds through valleys in quiet, narrow burns, and spills into deep lochs whose surfaces can lie smooth for hours before breaking into sudden ripples under a shift of wind. The air is often cool, carrying the scent of peat, wet stone, and the faint sweetness of heather. On mist-heavy mornings the hills themselves seem to dissolve at their edges, as though the land is only half here, and the rest belongs to some other place. It is in such places that the Kelpie is said to live. At first glance, the Kelpie appears as nothing more than a fine horse standing by the water's edge. Its coat is sleek and dark, often black, though sometimes described as deep green when caught in the right light. Its mane drips with water, even when the ground around it is dry. The animal's stance is perfect, strong legs, proud head, eyes bright with intelligence, the sort of horse that might tempt even the most cautious traveler to reach out and take hold of its reins. But the beauty of the Kelpie is a kind of trap. The old stories say that if you touch the creature, if you place a hand on its neck or a foot in its stirrup, you will find you cannot let go. Your skin sticks to its hide as if it were glued there, no matter how you struggle. The Kelpie will then turn toward the water, moving at first with the calm grace of any well-trained mount. But once it reaches the shallows, it surges forward, with the speed of a river in flood, dragging you beneath the surface. Where it takes its victims is left to the imagination. Some say the Kelpie eats those it captures, leaving only a liver to wash ashore as proof of what happened. Others believe it delivers them to a realm beneath the water from which no one returns. And a few insist the creature does not kill for hunger, but simply because it can, because its nature is tied to the dangerous unpredictability of the lochs and rivers it inhabits. Yet not every meeting with a Kelpie ends in tragedy. There are tales of people who have outwitted it, cutting off a hand or foot to break free, or tricking the creature into wearing a bridle made of blessed iron. In some stories, a captured Kelpie can be forced to serve as a powerful working horse, its strength unmatched, and its obedience complete until the bridle is removed. Even then, it will often vanish into the nearest water without a backward glance. The origins of the Kelpie are older than the written records of the Highlands. Long before the name Kelpie appeared in texts, there were warnings about dangerous horses by the water and about spirits who could take the form of beasts to lure people into the depths. Some believe the creature is a memory of the old river gods, once honored but later feared as Christianity spread through the region. Others see it as an embodiment of the water itself, beautiful, vital, but capable of turning deadly without warning. In the long winters, when the days are short and the nights seem endless, the stories of the Kelpie serve as more than fireside entertainment. They are a reminder of the dangers hidden in the familiar landscape. The loch you pass every day may look calm, but its depths are cold and without mercy. A sunny afternoon by the river can become in a moment a place where the world above and the world below meet, and where the balance is not in your favor. Even now, in the 21st century, the legend persists. In parts of Scotland, parents still tell their children to be wary of horses found alone near water. Fishermen, walking the banks at dusk, sometimes pause when they hear the sound of hooves splashing somewhere nearby, only to find nothing when they look. And on certain misty mornings, when a dark shape stands motionless at the far end of the loch, there are those who turn back, unwilling to take the chance, For the Kelpie is not a creature that announces itself. It waits, still and patient, until someone comes too close. And then, like the deep water it calls home, it draws them in. The lochs of the highlands have a way of hiding their size. From certain bends in the shore, a body of water might appear no larger than a pond, its far side visible through the drifting mist. But walk a little further along the bank, and the land falls away, revealing a vast stretch of water that reaches beyond sight. The distant hills only faint outlines against a shifting sky. It is in these places, where the known world seems to slip into something larger and less certain, that the Kelpie is most often imagined. The creature does not always appear as a horse. While the most common tales describe a dark steed standing by the water, there are older accounts in which the Kelpie takes human form. In these it is often a tall figure, handsome or beautiful, with hair as black as a wet mane and eyes that reflect the water's depth. Their clothing, when described, is damp or dripping, as though they have just stepped from the loch. The only sure sign of what they are comes in the small details: a strand of river weed tangled in their hair, the faint scent of algae on their skin, or the sound of water dripping from their sleeves. Even when the ground is dry dot in either form, the Kelpie's purpose remains the same: to lure the unwary into its grasp. In its human guise it might stand at the edge of a narrow bridge, offering help to a traveler who looks lost. In its equine shape it might wait in a meadow that slopes gently toward the loch, grazing as if it had wandered there by accident. But however it presents itself, the outcome is always a movement toward the water. One of the most telling features of the Kelpie is its hide. Those who have touched it describe a surface unlike any other, smooth, almost oily, and impossibly strong. Once skin meets skin, the connection is complete. The victim cannot let go, even if they know what is happening. This strange adhesive quality has given rise to one of the most chilling images in the folklore: a group of children climbing onto the back of a friendly-looking horse, only to find themselves unable to dismount as it carries them straight into the depths. The Kelpie's strength is also the stuff of legend. When captured with an enchanted bridle, it can pull immense weights, carry loads that would break an ordinary animal, and work tirelessly without food or rest. But such service is always temporary. The moment the bridle is removed, the Kelpie is free, and it wastes no time in vanishing into the nearest water, leaving the person who held it behind with a mix of relief and uneased doubt, as with many creatures of old belief. The Kelpie's role is double-edged. On one hand, it is a predator, a warning made flesh about the dangers of trusting appearances. On the other, it is a test, a way for the clever or prepared to prove themselves. Those who know the signs can avoid its trap. Those who carry the right protections can even turn its power to their advantage. This balance of threat and opportunity is part of what has kept the legend alive for centuries. Modern visitors to the highlands may think of the Kelpie as a romantic symbol, a remnant of mist and myth in a landscape that already feels otherworldly. Sculptures and public art sometimes present it as a graceful, almost noble figure, rising from the water as if to greet the land. But for the communities that grew up along the lochs, the story has always been more practical. It is a reminder that water, however beautiful, is never without risk. It can take as swiftly as it gives, and it often takes without warning. There are still places in Scotland where people claim to have seen the Kelpie, a lone horse black as peat, grazing on a foggy morning, a riderless figure moving along the shore in the half-light of evening, its steps leaving no tracks, a shape sliding beneath the water just as the mist begins to thin. Whether these are real encounters or the mind's way of shaping what it cannot explain, the effect is the same, a renewed respect for the loch and for whatever may dwell within. The Kelpie belongs to a category of beings that are always nearby, but rarely seen. It does not roam the hills like a stag or soar above the moors like an eagle. It waits, still as the depths it calls home, for the moment when someone draws too close, and when that moment comes, it moves with the inevitability of the tide. Some lochs seem to breathe. On certain days the water lies still, its surface a mirror for the clouds. On others it stirs without wind, long ripples sliding from nowhere to nowhere, as if something beneath has shifted in its sleep. Those who live by these waters know that the calm can change quickly, and they watch for signs that others might miss, the sudden silence of birds, the faint smell of wet earth rising from the shore, the way the air feels heavier, as though the loch itself is leaning closer. The Kelpie, they say, is most active at times of change, when the weather turns, when the seasons shift, when the boundaries between night and day are blurred. Dawn and dusk are its favored hours, and mist is its favored cover. From a distance, in low light, almost anything can be mistaken for a horse. The curve of a branch overhanging the water, the dark shape of a rock breaking the surface, the slow movement of an animal grazing near the reeds, all can become, in the half-light, the promise of a mount waiting to be claimed. In the older stories, there is often a moment of choice. A traveler, weary from the road, spots the creature and feels the familiar human impulse to approach what is beautiful. The Kelpie does not beckon, but it does not move away. Its stillness is an invitation. In some tales the traveler resists, passing by with only a glance. In others they step closer and closer still, until their hand meets the smooth, wet hide, and the choice is no longer theirs. The pull of the Kelpie is more than physical. Those who have escaped its grasp speak of a strange fog of thought that descends when they draw near. The air feels warmer, their vision narrows, and the world beyond the creature seems to lose its shape. They remember details, the gleam of the mane, the dark depth of the eyes, but not the steps that carried them forward. It is as though the loch itself is reaching out through the Kelpie, guiding them toward the place where water meets skin. And always beneath the surface there is movement. Some accounts describe the final plunge as a sudden, violent thing, a flash of hooves, a rush of cold, and then the crushing silence of deep water. Others speak of it as a slower descent, the light above fading gradually, the water closing around them like a living thing. In both, there is the same ending. The victim is gone, and the loch returns to stillness, as if nothing had happened. But the Kelpie is not only a tale of danger. There are stories in which it spares those who meet its gaze, turning away as if deciding against the kill. In a few rare accounts it even helps, carrying a lost child to safety, or warning a fisherman of a coming storm. These moments are rare enough to be remembered for generations, and they add to the mystery. Is the Kelpie a mindless predator, or a thinking spirit with its own rules? The truth, as the Highlands keep it, is that the Kelpie is part of the water, and the water is both life and death. It can sustain and it can take. To live alongside it is to accept that you cannot control which side you will see dot in modern Scotland. The Kelpie has taken on new forms in statues, in literature, in the imagination of those who visit the lochs. But the old warnings still hold their shape. Do not linger too long near the water's edge. Do not trust the beauty that waits without moving. And if you hear the sound of hooves in the mist, think carefully before you look, because the Kelpie is not bound by time. It does not fade because the world grows louder or brighter. It waits, as it always has, for the moment when someone steps too close to the boundary between land and water, and then it pulls them beneath, into the place where the loch keeps its secrets. Conclusion. The Kelpie is more than a creature in the mist. It is the distilled essence of the Highland waters, the beauty that draws you closer, the danger that waits just beneath the surface. It reminds us that not all invitations are meant to be accepted, and that even the most graceful form can hide an unyielding pull dot in every telling. The Kelpie stands at the threshold between safety and surrender. It is the loch's way of reminding those who live beside it that the water is alive, that it has moods, and that it is not ours to command. The stories are not just about fear. They are about respect. They say, the loch will not always be as it appears. Be watchful. Be wary. Keep your distance unless you are willing to give yourself to it entirely. The beauty of the Kelpie's form, the sleek coat, the bright eyes, the perfect stance is part of the lesson. It teaches that danger does not always come snarling or roaring. Sometimes it waits in stillness, in silence, wearing a face you think you understand. Even today, in a Scotland with roads and engines and weather forecasts, there are places where the old caution holds. A lone horse by the water might still be given a wide berth. A riderless figure seen at the far end of the loch might still quicken the step of those on the shore. And in the mist, when the sound of hooves is carried over still water, some will still turn back without looking. The Kelpie's story endures because it speaks to something deeper than folklore. It is about the choices we make at the edges of the unknown, and about the quiet pull of forces we cannot see. The loch will always be there, waiting, its surface as smooth as glass, hiding the depth that lies beneath. And the Kelpie, whether you believe in it or not, will be there too, standing in the shallows, watching, patient as the tide, because some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. And some beauty, no matter how close it stands, is meant to be left alone. The Amazon River moves with a kind of patience that only the oldest waters seem to know. It does not hurry, though its current is steady. It does not boast, though it carries more life than any other river on earth. Its color is not the deep blue of mountain lakes, but a shifting, earthy brown, rich with the soil of countless tributaries. Under the green canopy of the rainforest, its surface sometimes lies as smooth as a polished stone, reflecting only the tangle of leaves above. And somewhere beneath that surface, in the dim, warm world of silt and shadows, the incantados are said to live. Before the arrival of Europeans, before maps drew borders across the forest, the people of the Amazon told stories of these beings, spirits that wore the shape of the boto, the pink river dolphin. In daylight, the boto was a familiar sight, surfacing with a gentle puff of breath before slipping back under the water. But at night, when the moonlight turned the river silver, the boto might change. It might climb out onto the bank, shed its skin like a garment, and walk into the village as a tall, elegant person dressed in white dot in this human form. The Encantado was always handsome or beautiful, with a charm that drew people in. Their eyes, some said, held the shifting colors of the river itself, warm brown, quicksilver, or pale green. They spoke softly, moved gracefully, and always seemed to arrive when the music began. Music was central to their nature. At village gatherings or festivals, when drums and flutes filled the air, the Encantado would dance among the people as if the rhythm were part of their own heartbeat. Those who danced with them spoke of feeling strangely light, as though the world around them had grown softer, more dreamlike. But there was always a price for drawing close dot in many stories. The Encantado could not remain long on land. Before dawn, they had to return to the river, lest they be trapped in human form. Often they would vanish as quietly as they had appeared, leaving behind only the memory of their smile, and sometimes a longing that would not fade. There were tales of people who followed the Encantado back to the river, stepping into the dark water and never returning. Others claimed to hear music drifting from beneath the surface on moonlit nights, as if the party continued in some hidden ballroom far below dot. The elders said the Encantados came for many reasons. Some sought the company of humans out of curiosity, drawn to the warmth of the firelight and the scent of food. Others came to lure people away, either to join them in the underwater realm or to settle old grievances. And some came simply to listen to the music of the living world. The underwater world of the Encantado was described in many ways: a grand city of pale stone and golden light, a soft, endless twilight, filled with drifting plants and strange fish, or a place where the river's surface shimmered above like a ceiling of moving glass. Time in that world did not flow as it did on land. A single night spent there might stretch into years in the human world, or pass in the blink of an eye. Because of this, those who returned from the Encantado's realm, if they returned at all, were often changed. They moved more slowly, as if still listening for music others could not hear. Their eyes seemed to hold reflections of a place no one else could see. Some were restless, always looking toward the river. That not all encounters were romantic or dangerous. In some stories, the Encantado acted as a guide, leading lost travelers along the safest parts of the river at night, or warning fishermen of storms to come. In these cases, the visitor would often be gone by morning, leaving behind a sense of gratitude and a reminder that the river, for all its dangers, could also be generous. But the most common warnings about the Encantado were spoken to the young. Children were told not to wander near the water alone, especially at night, lest the Encantado invite them to see the wonders beneath the surface. To accept such an invitation was to step into a different kind of life, one from which you might never return. Even today, in riverside communities of Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru, the stories linger. The boto is still respected, sometimes even feared. Fishermen will not harm one, for to kill a river dolphin is to risk angering the Encantado themselves. And in the evenings, when music drifts out over the darkening river, there are still those who glance toward the water, half expecting a stranger in white to appear at the edge of the light. The Encantado lives in that edge, between water and land, human and spirit, music and silence. It is not fully of either world, and perhaps that is why it moves between them so easily. And for as long as there is music by the river at night, the people say the Encantado will keep coming ashore. In the river towns of the Amazon there is a certain kind of evening that seems made for stories. The air is warm but not heavy. The river moves with a gentle, unbroken current, and the sky glows with the last orange of sunset before it fades into a deep indigo. The smell of cooking fires drifts through the air, carrying the scent of fish, cassava bread, and the sweet, smoky undertones of burning wood. Children play in the dust near the edge of the light, their laughter carrying toward the water, where it mingles with the low hum of insects waking for the night dot. It is on such evenings that people look toward the river's edge a little more, often as though expecting a visitor. The Encantado does not arrive with fanfare. There is no splash, no warning. One moment the river bank is empty. The next, a figure is simply there, tall, dressed in white, the fabric moving with the smallest breeze. Their appearance is striking, but not in the way of something strange or frightening. It is a beauty that feels slightly out of place, like a fine bird perched in the wrong tree. The white clothing gleams faintly in the firelight, and the figure's face, whether man or woman, holds an expression that is open and calm, yet watchful. In some villages, people will greet the stranger politely, offering food or a seat near the music. In others, they will do the same, but their eyes will flick often toward the river, and they will keep their children close. Everyone, whether they admit it or not, knows the rule. You do not refuse the Encantado, but you do not forget what they are. Once among the people, the Encantado is never in a hurry. They will talk, listen, laugh at stories, and dance when the music begins. The drums and flutes seem to draw something out of them, a brightness in their eyes, a lightness in their movements. Those who have danced with them often say it feels as though the rhythm moves through the body differently, making the world beyond the circle of dancers fade until only the music and the motion remain. But there are always signs for those who watch closely. The hat that the Encantado wears, pulled low over the forehead to hide the faint curve of a blowhole that no human should have. The way they avoid speaking of where they come from, answering such questions with a smile or a turn of the conversation. And when the music pauses, the way their gaze drifts inevitably back to the river, as if hearing something no one else can. Stories say that if an Encantado chooses someone, their charm can be irresistible. A fisherman's daughter might find herself drawn to the quiet stranger with the river-colored eyes. A young man might notice the graceful woman who seems to know the steps of every dance without having learned them. In these tales, the chosen person will often disappear from the gathering without realizing how far they've wandered, only to be found later, if they are found at all, standing at the edge of the dark water, staring into its depths. There are gentler stories, too. In some, the Encantado warns of dangers in the coming days, a storm that will flood the riverbanks, a fever that will pass through the village, a shoal of fish that will soon migrate upriver. These warnings, when followed, have saved lives. Such visits are remembered fondly, and the people will speak of that particular Encantado with respect for years afterward. But whether they bring help or temptation, The rule is the same. They will be gone by morning. At the first faint light of dawn, the encantado will slip away, walking with unhurried grace toward the river. Once at the edge, they will vanish, sometimes in plain sight, their form blurring before the eyes as they step into the water and become the smooth, arcing shape of a dolphin once more. Other times they seem to dissolve into the mist that rises from the river at daybreak. Those who see them go often speak of feeling an ache, as though something rare and irreplaceable has been lost. Yet they also feel lighter, as if touched by a dream they cannot entirely remember. Over time, people have tried to explain the encantado in the language of the everyday. Some say they are simply botos, pink river dolphins, whose intelligence and playfulness inspire the imagination. Others believe the stories began as ways to explain the sudden disappearances of people, the strange music heard on quiet nights, or the deep pull the river can exert on those who live beside it. But for those who have met the white-clad stranger, no explanation is needed. The memory of their presence is enough. The cool shimmer of their clothing in the firelight, the way their laughter blended with the music, the feeling that, for a little while, the river itself had stepped onto the land to join the living in their dance. And perhaps that is the truth of it. The encantado is not simply a creature or a spirit, but the river given shape, its beauty, its danger, its pull, visiting the people it has watched over for generations. The river at night can feel like the deepest road in the world. It stretches in both directions, endless and dark, with no walls and no ceiling, but the shifting patterns of moon and cloud. The sound of its movement is soft enough to disappear under the hum of insects, yet steady enough to anchor the whole forest. It is in this quiet, where the air feels heavy with unseen life, that the encantado's presence is strongest. Some say you can tell when they are near by the way the river seems to breathe differently, the surface loosening into long, slow ripples even when there is no wind, as though something beneath is turning in its sleep. Others claim the sign is in the sound, the faint strains of flute or guitar carried over the water, too far away to be any human hand. And a few insist there is no warning at all, that one moment you are alone by the river and the next you are looking into the eyes of someone who seems to know your name without having heard it. It is this effortless closeness that makes the encantado dangerous to the unwary. Their manner is not demanding but inviting, as if the choice to follow is entirely your own. They will speak softly, sometimes of things they should not know, a memory from your childhood, a dream you once had, a worry you've never voiced aloud. They do not push. They simply open the door and wait for you to walk through. And walking through, in their world, often means walking toward the river. The transformation from human form back to dolphin is rarely seen directly. More often, the person they have chosen finds themselves drawn closer and closer to the edge, the black water lapping quietly at their feet. Perhaps the encantado offers a hand, or perhaps their smile alone is enough to tip the balance. One step into the cool water, and the world tilts. In some stories, this is where the surface closes over the person's head and the rest is silence. In others, the moment is filled with light, an otherworldly glow from below, as if the river were not water, but a doorway opening into another place. Those who follow describe a strange, rushing stillness, as though they are moving quickly, but without wind or current. And then they arrive. The Encantado's realm is not the murky bottom of the river, as most imagine it. Instead, it is said to be a place of wide open halls filled with a dim golden light, where the floor feels like smooth stone and the ceiling sways like water seen through glass. Shapes move slowly in the distance. Dolphins, yes, but also figures that shift between human and animal as they pass. Music comes from nowhere and everywhere, the same tunes heard in riverside villages, but softer, as though played from memory. Time in this place is its own kind of current. Some who enter feel only minutes pass before they return to the surface, finding the night exactly as they left it. Others emerge to find years gone by, the village changed, the people they knew now old or gone, and some never emerge at all, their names becoming part of the whispered warnings told to the young. Yet not all who visit are taken forever. Some return with gifts, a song no one else has heard, a charm carved from river stone, or simply the memory of beauty so strange it cannot be put into words. But always there is the mark of change, a tendency to stare too long at the water, a habit of listening when the river is quiet, a softening in the voice when they speak of the nights by the shore. There are stories of Encantados who fell in love with the human world enough to stay, resisting the pull of the river until it claimed them again. These tales rarely end happily. The longer an Encantado remains on land, the weaker they grow, as if the air itself cannot sustain them. They become restless, pale, and distant, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the water gleams. Inevitably, they vanish one night, leaving only wet footprints behind. In this way, the Encantado is a reminder of the river's dual nature. It gives and it takes. It is a place of life and connection, but also a force that will reclaim what belongs to it. The beauty of the white-clad stranger, the pull of their music, the wonder of their hidden world, all of it is bound to the same current that flows beneath the surface, steady and sure, carrying them home. And so the warnings remain. If you hear music on a windless night, think twice before following. If you see a stranger in white at the river's edge, remember that not every invitation is meant to be accepted. And if you feel the water pulling you toward its heart, ask yourself whether you are ready to give up the land entirely, because once you step fully into the Encantado's world, the river will not easily let you go. Conclusion. The Encantado does not belong entirely to the river, nor entirely to the land. It moves between them like the tide, pulled by forces neither realm can fully claim. To the people of the Amazon, it is not a simple fairy tale, but a reflection of the river itself, beautiful, unpredictable, and impossible to hold for long. Its stories speak to a truth at the river's edge. As always known, water connects as much as it divides. The Encantado is a bridge, a living reminder that the boundary between two worlds is thinner than it seems, and like the river's current, it can carry you somewhere you never meant to go. For some, the Encantado is a danger, a lure that draws the unwary into the depths from which they may never return. For others, it is a helper, offering guidance or protection before vanishing back into the current. In both forms, it holds the same lesson. The river is alive, and to live well beside it is to respect its mysteries. The white-clad stranger at the edge of the dance floor, the music drifting from unseen shores, the golden light imagined beneath. The water these images endure because they are part of a relationship as old as the river itself. They are the shape that longing takes when it looks across the boundary between human life and the world beyond. Even now, when the night is still and the river moves like a slow breath through the forest, some say the Encantado still comes ashore. Perhaps it joins the music for a while, or simply watches from the shadows. And when it leaves, the people who notice its absence might feel, for a heartbeat, the strange ache of something precious, slipping away in that moment. They understand what their elders meant, that the Encantado is not merely a creature, but an agreement that the river may walk among us from time to time, so long as we remember where it comes from, and that we are free to follow it, only if we are willing to accept the current's pull without looking back. The Encantado reminds, "You said beauty is not always meant to be kept, and that some invitations are meant only to be felt, not accepted. For in the end, the river always calls its own home. In the long quiet of the Australian night, when the heat of the day has faded, and the stars are sharp as chips of ice in a vast black sky, the land is not truly silent. It hums. Frogs trill in the reed beds, insects weave thin, bright threads of sound, and somewhere beyond the edge of the firelight, the water moves just enough to let you know it is alive. The people who have lived with that sound for tens of thousands of years knew that not all water was the same. There was the water you could drink, the water you could fish from, and the water you did not approach after sunset. Some billabongs, those deep, still pools left behind when rivers shift, were said to belong to something else entirely. They were not just part of the land, they were claimed in the oldest stories. The bunyip is not a single shape. Sometimes it is a seal-like animal with sleek fur and deep, wet eyes. Sometimes it is more like a crocodile, with jaws lined and teeth sharp as stone tools. Other times it is something stranger, long-necked, with the head of a dog, the body of a bird, and the habits of a predator that knows patience better than hunger. The people telling these stories never worried about choosing which version was true. The bunyip was not about description. It was about presence. It was about the knowledge that the deep water was not empty. To sit near a billabong at night was to feel that presence in the way the frogs grew quiet, in the slow ripple that spread from nowhere, in the heavy pause before a splash that seemed too large for any fish. It was to understand that this was not your place. The bunyip was not always an enemy. In some stories it was a guardian, keeping its pool pure, watching over the animals that drank there, punishing only those who took more than they needed or ignored the old rules. In others it was a danger without reason, a thing that pulled people under and did not let them return. Children were told of the bunyip not as a fairy tale, but as part of the map of the land, just as you learned which plants would feed you and which would sicken you. You learned which waters you could trust and which you could not. The bunyip's pools were marked in the memory of the elders, and in the rhythm of the songs that traced the country. In the light of day, the water could seem harmless, smooth, reflecting clouds and gum trees, dragonflies skimming its surface. But at night, with the stars above and the cool breath of the land rising from the surface, it became something else. It was a mirror without bottom. And if you stayed long enough to hear the splash, the sudden, deep collapse of water closing over something large, you would feel it then, that you were the one being watched Dot, there were rules for such moments. You did not run. The bunyip could move through its element faster than any person could move on land. You did not lean closer to look. Many of the lost were said to have been taken in that first curious glance. You simply stood still, turned your eyes away, and walked slowly, leaving the water to whatever lived beneath it. Not all encounters ended in fear. Some elders spoke of hearing the bunyip's call, a deep, booming note that rolled across the water and seemed to echo inside the chest. To hear it was to be reminded of the depth of the place you stood beside, of the time before roads, fences, when the land and water held their own law. Those who lived far from rivers and billabongs still knew the word. It traveled in the mouths of traders, and in the tales told around campfires, reaching even the coastal settlements where the sound of waves was louder than the call of frogs. And in time, when Europeans arrived, they too learned it, though they tried to capture it in drawings and taxonomies, turning a spirit into a specimen. They could not quite agree on what it looked like either. The truth, if truth is the right word, is that the bunyip was never meant to be seen clearly. It was meant to be felt, to be understood as a part of the land's deep memory. Dot, and in the still pools, under the silver light of the Southern Cross, that memory still waits. The daytime heat in the interior of Australia has a way of pulling every drop of moisture from the air. The earth cracks in places, the grass turns pale, and the horizon ripples with heat that hides the shapes of distant hills. Water in such a place is more than a comfort. It is survival. Yet among the Aboriginal peoples who carried the dreaming stories for tens of millennia, there were certain waters one did not approach without purpose. These were the deep, unmoving pools left behind when a river shrank or changed its course. Some were narrow and shaded, others broad and ringed with reeds. But they shared one thing. The stories said they were watched. The bunyip was not always spoken of as a predator, but always as a presence. To ignore that presence was to invite trouble. This was not just caution born of fear. It was a form of respect, a recognition that water has its own guardians. Dot, in some accounts from the Murray-Darling Basin, the bunyip's shape shifts like a reflection disturbed by ripples. In one telling, it rises like a seal with thick, wet fur glistening in moonlight, its head turning with a slow intelligence as it watches the bank. In another, it comes long-necked from the depths, its head shaped like a dog's, but its skin scaled and cold. In yet another, its eyes glow faintly just below the surface. Fixed on the intruder without breaking the water's skin, Dot, no matter its form, the bunyip moves with a stillness that is its own kind of power. Even when it strikes, there is no thrash, no flurry of spray, only a quiet pulling down, as if the water itself has decided to reclaim what stands too close. The elders explained if the bunyip kept balance. If the people took too many fish, if they polluted the water or broke the laws that governed its use, the bunyip would act. This was not punishment in the way humans think of it, but correction, a reminder that the pool was part of a larger whole, and that the whole would not allow itself to be diminished without response. Children, sitting cross-legged near the fire, learned to listen to the details of each story, where the bunyip lived, what had angered it, how the people had restored its favor. The lessons were woven into the tales, like reeds into a basket, to drink only after giving thanks, to fish with care, to step softly when the water was still. In the colonial era, settlers heard the stories, and, in their own way, they began to tell them too. They wrote of strange animal calls echoing across billabongs at night, of livestock that wandered too close to the water's edge and vanished without a trace. Some sent letters to newspapers describing enormous tracks in the mud, shaped unlike any hoof or paw they knew. These reports often ended with the same sentence: "The locals say it was the bunyip." Scientists of the time debated whether the creature could be a remnant of some prehistoric animal, a giant marsupial like the diprotodon, or perhaps an unknown species of seal that had adapted to inland waterways. Sketches varied wildly. Some showed a monstrous tusked beast with flippers. Others depicted something like a horse-headed serpent. The truth was always just beyond certainty, yet, for the aboriginal custodians of the land, the bunyip's reality did not need proving. Its existence was written in the behavior of the land itself, in the way a billabong's surface could go perfectly still, in the sudden absence of bird calls, in the shiver of reeds when there was no wind. These signs were enough. They told you when to drink, when to leave, and when to speak to the water as you would to an elder, with respect and patience, and many dreaming stories. The bunyip is not an isolated spirit, but part of a web of beings who shape and guard the land. It might be kin to the rainbow serpent, sharing in the creation of rivers and waterholes. It might act as the quiet counterpart to more visible totem animals, working unseen to keep their habitats safe. When the rains came flooding the lowlands and joining the scattered billabongs into a single shimmering body, the bunyip was said to travel more freely, slipping from one pool to the next. During these times, people spoke more cautiously near the water, for the guardian might be closer than usual, and when the floods receded, leaving behind new pools and reshaping the edges of the old, the elders would visit each one, offering words, songs, and sometimes food, not to lure the bunyip, but to acknowledge it. The gesture was as much for the people as it was for the creature, a way of reminding themselves that they were part of a shared landscape, not its owner's to sleep near. Such a pool was an act of trust or foolishness, depending on whom you asked. Some claimed that if you dreamed beside the bunyip's water, you might wake with a gift, a vision, a song, or a new understanding of the land. Others said you might not wake at all, even now in the still places where the stars reflect perfectly. In the dark water, it is easy to feel why such a story would endure. The bunyip is not just a monster, nor simply a guardian. It is the reminder that water remembers, that what lies beneath the surface is never as empty as it seems. By the time the moon is high over the land, the billabong becomes a different world. In daylight, it belongs to the birds that dart between the reeds, to the dragonflies hovering above the surface, to the kangaroos that come down the slope to drink. But at night it belongs to itself. The dark pools gather the silver of the stars, holding them in their depths until they look like windows into another sky. The gum trees lean in as if listening, their pale trunks glowing softly in the moonlight. And in the air there is that subtle change, the kind you feel more than hear. When the normal rhythm of the night falters, the old people would say, that is when you must listen, because the bunyip does not arrive with splashes and roars. Its presence begins in smaller signs. The frogs that sang so loudly minutes ago now fall silent, one by one. The wind dies, leaving the surface of the water smooth as glass. Even the insects seem to pause, their hum fading into the warm air until it is replaced by nothing at all. And then, sometimes you see it. Perhaps it is only a ripple, wide and slow, moving from the center of the pool to the reeds without any visible cause, or the faint glint of eyes just below the surface, vanishing the moment you notice them. If it breaks the water, it may do so silently, the long curve of a head or the soft arch of a back catching the moonlight, before sliding under again. The bunyip does not need to hurry. The pool is its element. It knows every hollow, every tangle of roots, every sudden drop into darkness. Those who stepped too close to its edge were sometimes pulled down with a swiftness that left no time for a cry. In some stories the water barely moved after. In others there was a swirl and a deep, low sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a call before silence returned, but the bunyip's role was never only to frighten. The elders spoke of its deeper purpose, to ensure the water was respected, to remind people that this was not a place to be taken for granted. The fear it inspired was paired with a kind of reverence. Offerings were made not to buy its favor, but to keep the relationship in balance. In one tale, a young hunter ignored the warnings and speared more fish than his family needed, leaving the unwanted ones to rot on the bank. That night, as he camped nearby, he heard the sound of something large moving in the water, not fast, but steady, deliberate. When he looked, he saw a shape rise from the center of the billabong, taller than a man, its wet skin shining black under the moon. The eyes were fixed on him, unblinking. By morning his camp was empty, and the fish were gone. The story was told not as a punishment, but as a reminder. The bunyip did not guard for itself. It guarded for the water, for the life within it, for the balance that allowed people to drink and fish year after year. When the Europeans heard these accounts, they tried to explain them in the language of natural science. Perhaps the creature was a seal that had wandered inland, or a large bird seen in poor light, or the exaggerated memory of a crocodile sighting. But the explanation was never the point. For the people whose ancestors had lived with the bunyip since the dreaming, the truth was in the land's own behavior. You did not need to see the guardian to know it was there. You only needed to watch the water and notice when it began watching you back. Even today, there are places where locals will not swim, no matter how hot the day. They will tell you it's because the bottom drops off too suddenly, or because the reeds are too thick. But sometimes, if you ask quietly, they will add, "That's a bunyip pool." And on rare nights when the air is still and the moon is bright, some claim they have heard it, that deep echoing sound that rolls across the water and into the trees, like the call of something ancient remembering its own name. It is not a roar meant to terrify, nor a song meant to charm. It is simply the voice of the pool itself, speaking in the language of the first stories, reminding those who hear it that the land and water are not separate, and that everything which lives between them is part of the same old law. The bunyip is still there, in the hidden pools and shaded bends of rivers, in the places where reflection hides more than it shows. It is in the watchfulness of the land, in the way the silence thickens at the edge of water. It will wait for as long as it needs to, because the billabong does not forget, and neither does what lives in it. Conclusion. Asterisk, the bunyip was never just an animal to be spotted, or a legend to be told on cold nights. It was a current in the deeper waters of memory, a presence that tied people to the land and the law that shaped it. In the dreaming, every living thing had its place, and every place had its guardian. The bunyip's pools were not marked on maps, but in the minds and songs of those who knew them. Its story was told to children not to frighten them into obedience, but to give them the tools to live well in a world where survival depended on knowing when to take and when to leave alone. To drink from a billabong without first acknowledging its keeper was more than discourtesy. It was to break the relationship between people and place. For outsiders, the bunyip became a puzzle to be solved, a mystery that might yield to science. If only its shape could be captured in a net or on a sketch pad. For those who had always lived with it, the mystery was part of its truth. If the guardian could be pinned down, if its boundaries could be erased, the balance it held would dissolve today. There are still pools and bends of rivers where the water is avoided after dark. The explanation might be couched in terms of safety or tradition or simple habit, but under the words lies the old understanding. Water is not empty. It has memory and it keeps its own watch, and perhaps the bunyip is still there in the places where reflection hides depth, where the reeds shiver without wind, where silence thickens and something unseen keeps pace with you. If you stand long enough at such a pool, you might feel the weight of eyes in the dark water. You might feel the pause in the air, as if waiting for you to speak. The right response is not fear. It is recognition, a nod to the keeper, a word of thanks to the water that has given you life, because the bunyip does not belong to a vanished past. It belongs to the ongoing present, where stories are not relics, but living agreements. Agreements between land, water, and the people who walk between them. And if you keep that agreement, the water will remain generous. Rake it, and the pool will remember. There are places in the world where silence is not peace, where it presses too tightly against the skin, and even the wind seems to hold its breath. In those places people speak softly and walk quickly, not out of fear exactly, but out of respect for what might still be listening. In Japan, long before glowing cities and quiet bullet trains, before street lamps and cell towers, the land was soft with rice fields and mist, and the night stretched wide. Stories clung to the trees and crept through the mountain paths. Some of them were warm, some mischievous, and others ... Others were heavier, like footsteps too large to be heard. The Gashadakuro does not speak. It does not laugh or taunt. It is not mischievous like the kitsune, nor fleeting like the yurei. It is something else entirely, larger, heavier, quieter. Its name means starving, skeleton, and that is what it is, but not a single skeleton. It is a body built of many bodies, a towering giant formed from the bones of those who died without burial, without name, without peace. People who vanished in war, in famine, in silence. People who are not grieved. When bones are left unremembered, stories say they do not stay still. The Gashadakuro rises slowly, in places where the ground is soaked with forgotten sorrow. It does not come often, but when it does, it is always at night, midnight perhaps, or later, when the sky is black and the moon is full, silvering the landscape with light too soft to see clearly. In those hours, villagers once swore they heard. The sound, a faint clatter, like teeth chattering far off, not fast, not loud, rhythmic, bones shifting against each other, as if the earth itself had grown a skeleton and was trying to walk again. They would close their doors. They would not look outside. They would whisper the old prayers and hope the creature was walking somewhere else that night. The Gashadakurl does not run or chase. It glides. Its bones do not scrape the ground. They hover, suspended by some sorrowful force that defies decay. It is said to be 15 times the size of a man, so tall it can step over trees without noticing. It leaves no footprints, no trail dot, and yet, sometimes in the morning, there is blood dot, not always, not often, just enough to remember that it does not kill for revenge. It does not know who to blame. It was not given names or funerals or last words. It kills because it is still hungry. It is said to appear in the aftermath of terrible battles, the kind where no one returns to collect the dead, or in villages swallowed by starvation, where people fall and are not buried. It grows from what we choose to forget, from what we choose to leave behind. In those days, and even now in some quiet corners, elders tell children to respect the graveyards, to not step over headstones, to bow near the shrines, not for superstition, but for memory. Because when bones are left without names, they remember anyway, and they build themselves a body to carry that memory forward. The Gashadakurl has no eyes, but it sees, not in color or shape, but in heat, in pulse. It can feel your blood, they say, before you even know you're being watched. Some stories say you hear it first, a rattling, then silence, then your head removed in an instant, lifted by an invisible hand. There is no scream, no chase, just one motion, and then nothing. But others say that if you stay still, if you show respect, if you carry a small bell or say the names of the dead aloud, it will pass over you, searching for the ones who forgot to grieve, or the ones who took life without. Meaning, it does not kill children. It does not hunt animals. Only humans. Only those with memory in their bones. Temples sometimes placed small effigies at the edges of towns. Bells were hung in trees. Bamboo mats were tied with charms to keep the forgotten from rising. Some said it worked. Others were not so sure. Still, the creature is rarely seen. It appears in shadows, in stories and fragments of scrolls drawn long. After its footsteps faded, it was not a god. It had no shrine. It was a warning, a shape given to neglect, a reminder carved in ivory and ash even today, when trains pass silently through rice fields and neon signs pulse gently in the dark. Some people still feel it, especially in the older parts of the country. A shadow against the window, too tall to be a man. A soft rattle on windless nights. You might think it's nothing. You might be right. But if you're alone, and it's late, and your heart feels strangely loud in your chest, don't speak. Don't. Run. And whatever you do, don't forget the names of those who came before, because the Gashadakurl remembers them. All of them, and it is still walking. The villages that once feared the Gashadakurl knew the sound of grief in all its forms. They knew the raw cry of a widow on the morning after battle, the soft, keening wail of a mother whose child had slipped away in famine. They knew the silence of a field left unplanted because there were no hands left to tend it. And they knew, perhaps better than anyone today, that grief unspoken does not vanish. It waits not. It was said that the Gashadakuro did not simply form in a moment. It was a long, slow gathering, a patient weaving together of what the world had chosen to leave untended. When soldiers fell in the mountains and were left where they lay, when hunger hollowed the faces of entire families until they slipped into the dust, when plague carried away the sick faster than the living could bury them, the land took note. The earth cradled the bones. The bones remembered. And somewhere in the deep darkness beneath root and stone, they began to call to one another. Perhaps the first sound was not the rattle of bone, but the quiet knock of skull meeting skull in the dark. A long, slow echo no human ear could hear. But the call spread. Bone sought bone. Femur met femur. Ribs slid into the curve of another rib cage, not in the neat order of a single body, but in the sprawling, impossible architecture of a giant's frame. The Gashadakuro was not a single person's remains. It was a tapestry of hundreds, each bone carrying a fragment of hunger, of loss, of abandonment. And then, one night, it would rise. The old storytellers said that the Gashadakuro did not need flesh, did not need muscle or sinew. The force that held it together was older and more stubborn than life. It was the will of the forgotten to be seen again. That will lifted the skeleton, piece by impossible piece, into the black sky. And when the moonlight touched it, the hollows of its skull glowed faintly, like the embers of a fire that could never quite die out. It did not rush toward the living. It moved with the slow, terrible certainty of something that had all the time in the world. It could stand for hours, on the edge of a forest, half hidden by mist, watching the flicker of lamplight in the windows of a sleeping village. It could listen to the distant ring of temple bells, as if deciding whether those bells rang for the dead or for the living, trying to keep the dead away in its presence. Time felt strange. Those who claimed to have survived an encounter said that moments stretched, that heartbeats grew louder until they drowned out thought. And if you looked up, the stars themselves seemed dimmed by the outline of something impossibly tall between you, and the sky it was not invincible. In some tales, monks with the purest prayers could banish it. In others, a procession of villagers carrying lanterns and chanting the names of the unburied could disperse its form bone by bone until nothing remained but dust. But such victories were rare and never without cost. The act of naming the forgotten meant carrying their stories, their pain, into yourself. There was a warning carried down through generations. Feed the memory, or the memory will feed itself. It meant that one must tend to the past, even when it is heavy, even when it is filled with loss. Because if we do not, the Gashadakuro will tend to it for us, and it will do so in its own wordless way. The landscape of Japan holds quiet reminders of this. Shaded cemeteries tucked behind shrines. Stone markers no taller than a knee, their inscriptions worn unreadable by centuries of rain. Fields where no one plants anymore, where wild grass hides what lies beneath. In the hush of early morning, before the crows begin to call, one can imagine the bones shifting below the surface, testing their weight, remembering how it felt to stand. Those who have walked alone on narrow mountain roads after dark will speak. of a certain moment when the crickets stop singing and the wind falls still, when the mist thickens in a way that makes distances uncertain. It is in that pause, they say, that you must decide. Will you keep walking without acknowledging the quiet shapes at the edges of the path? Or will you stop, bow low, and whisper the names of those who never made it home? Because somewhere beyond the edge of your sight, the Gashadakuro might be listening, and it is always hungry for the sound of a heartbeat that has forgotten the weight of the unburied. The Gashadakuro is not a creature that comes with warning bells or sudden storms. Its arrival is quieter than both. It slips into the edges of the night the way mist slides over water, without a sound, without a rush, without anything to suggest that something is now sharing the darkness with you. It is, in its way, patient, centuries patient. It does not need to devour every living thing it encounters. It is not fire or plague. Instead, it seems to seek only enough to feed the emptiness that birthed it, as if it knows that to take too much would burn it away. The hunger it carries is not the kind that can be satisfied, not with flesh, not with bone, not even with fear. It is the hunger of being unseen, unspoken, unremembered. For the people who told its story, this was the most dangerous kind of hunger, because it was one they understood. Villages knew famine, families knew loss, and sometimes when the harvest failed or the river shifted its course, they knew what it meant to leave their dead behind. That was the first wound, and the Gashadakuro was the shadow cast by it. The few who claimed to have looked upon it up close spoke of its terrible stillness. It could stop for hours, its massive frame unmoving, as if listening for something far away. Its empty jaw did not chatter constantly. Sometimes it would remain open, as though tasting the night air, the faint metallic scent of blood, the heat of human bodies moving somewhere beyond the mist. Legends say that the safest way to survive was to make yourself as small and silent as possible, to become part of the stillness it inhabited. Movement drew its attention. Noise was worse. Some stories advise lying flat on the ground until its shadow passes over you. Others say to place a charm of rice and salt on your chest and close your eyes until the sound of rattling bones fades. For some, there was no passing over. The Gashadakuro could pluck a person from the earth with a hand as long as a fishing boat, lift them high into the cool dark, and bite down with a sound like a collapsing house. It is said the skull of the victim would remain intact until it joined the others, fitting into some vast unseen design, like a final puzzle, piece in a nightmare that began long before you were born. There were older priests who believed the Gashadakuro was not to be feared but acknowledged. They would hold small night ceremonies on the anniversaries of great battles, burning incense and reading the names of those who fell until the smoke curled high enough to blur the stars. In doing so, they believed they could keep the bones sleeping beneath the soil. But even in peace, even when memory was tended to carefully, there was always the possibility that somewhere in some unmarked place, the gathering had already begun. In modern times, the story lingers in quiet corners, in the soft hum of an empty train station long after the last departure, in the way fog sometimes hides the upper floors of buildings, turning their shapes into something skeletal, in the strange quiet of a rural road where no cars pass, and yet you feel watched. The Gashadakuro is no longer bound to the fields of the Sengoku era or the famine-stricken villages of old Japan. Stories have a way of traveling with those who carry them. Now it could be anywhere a mass of the forgotten lies. Anywhere people vanish without rites, without names, without someone to keep their memory warm. And perhaps that is the truest part of the tale. It is not about a monster of bone, but about the quiet, patient hunger of neglect. The understanding that nothing, not even the dead, likes to be left alone forever. So if you find yourself walking on a misty night and the world suddenly falls silent, remember that silence might have weight. It might have shape. It might be listening for you. And if in that pause you feel your own bones grow cold, bow low to the dark. Speak the names you remember. Give the unburied something to hold. Because if you do not, the Gashadakuro will. Conclusion. The Gashadakuro is not the kind of monster that dies when the story ends. It does not live in a single time or place, and it does not fade when the teller falls silent. It lives in the gaps, in the spaces between memory and forgetting, in the unmarked places where bones lie alone. In the villages that first spoke its name, it was not just a warning about the supernatural. It was a warning about neglect. The people who knew hunger and war also knew how easy it was for the dead to slip away from the living's thoughts, and they understood the price of letting that happen. The Gashadakuro was the shape of that price, an impossible giant made of what had been abandoned. In the end, the stories were not about how to fight it, but how to avoid needing to. They spoke of tending the graves, of speaking the names, of giving the departed their place in the world of the living. They spoke of bells hung in trees, of lanterns lit on forgotten anniversaries, of bowing to empty air when you felt unseen eyes in the dark. The lesson was not fear. It was responsibility. Today, when the mist rises in the valleys and the night is quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat, the Gashadakuro still walks in the imagination. Perhaps it will never appear again as it did in the old nights, 15 times taller than a man, blotting out the moon. Or perhaps it is only waiting for the world to forget enough for its bones to knit together once more. But even if it never comes, its shadow remains. It moves in the silence after tragedy, in the stillness of neglected cemeteries, in the empty space where a name should be. And so the old warning lingers. Feed the memory, or the memory will feed itself. Because if we do not remember them, the forgotten will find a way to remember us. Before the cities, before the borders, before the printed word, the Maya people looked into the mouth of the earth, and it looked back. There were caves in the limestone hills of Guatemala, Honduras, and Chiapas, where silence wrapped around the body like a second skin. These caves were not simply holes in the ground, not to them. They were sacred entrances to Xibalba, the underworld, the place of trials, of spirits, of endings and beginnings. And within those shadows, within those endless caverns of humid breath and quiet rock, lived Camazotz. The name means death bat or snatch bat in the KC Maya language. But names only scratch the surface. Camazotz was not simply a bat, not even a monstrous one. He was an idea given shape, a presence given wings, a god who embodied the sharpness of endings, the terror of darkness, and the fine, still line between. Life and what waits just beyond in the cool hush of the ancient night. Before artificial light, before roads, before noise, bats were both known and unknowable. The Maya saw them sweeping through the dusk, soundless but for the occasional rustle of leathery wings. They saw them nesting deep in caves, hanging upside down like shadows pretending to sleep. These creatures were part of the living world, but barely. They did not walk. They did not chirp like birds. They flew with a silence that felt borrowed from somewhere deeper. Kamazots was not one of them, but he was like them, magnified. A bat the size of a man, fanged, red-eyed, with claws sharp enough to cut through time itself. Some depictions show him as a man with a bat's head, others as a bat with human limbs. Either way, he was never still. He was never warm. He was the motion you sense in the dark when you're alone, the breath that comes too close to your ear when you're not speaking dot in the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Ke Maya. Kamazats is named directly. In this epic of creation and destruction, of gods and twins and death and rebirth, the hero twins, Hanapu and Ezbalank, descend into the underworld and face a series of trials set by the lords of Xibalba. One such trial takes place in the House of Bats, where Kamazats waits in the gloom. The house is not a house in the human sense. It is a realm, a place made of echoes and wings and the thick, metallic scent of old blood. There the twins are told to rest. They lie in their blowguns, hiding themselves from the night's dangers. But Kamazats is clever and patient. He knows the rhythm of fear, the quiet hum it sings into your bones. He waits, and then, when one of the twins dares peek out, he strikes. One swift motion, and Hanapu's head is gone dot. It is not just a moment of violence. It is a ritual, a lesson. The underworld is not forgiving. It is not built for courage or foolishness. Kamazots does not roar or rage. He cuts dot, and then he waits again. This image, the bat god who decapitates, who brings clean endings, who perches in the dark with knowledge older than breath, held power. For a people who revered balance, duality, cycles, and sacrifice, Kamazats was not evil. He was necessary, like rot to the forest, like stillness to the hunt dot. He appears in temple carvings etched into stone with precision. He watches with those blank, bad eyes, his ears stretched high, his wings sometimes folded, sometimes outstretched. In certain depictions he holds a blade. Sometimes the blade is his face. He is always upright, always alert, like a moment before. A scream that never comes. The Maya did not separate gods from nature. Kamazots was as real as the cave he lived in, as the jungle surrounding it. He did not demand worship so much as he demanded remembrance. And so he was remembered, in stories and ceremonies, in the careful way people stepped near cave mouths after dusk. Some scholars believe that Kamazots may have been inspired by the Desmodus Draculae, an extinct giant vampire bat that once flew over Central and South America. With a wingspan of up to 5 feet and a taste for blood, this real creature might have passed into memory as myth. But even if it didn't, the bat's shape is too symbolic to ignore. It is a creature of inversion, hanging upside down, awake. At night, nourished not by sunlight, but by things left behind dot in the humid dark of ancient temples. Priests wearing bat-shaped masks performed rituals in Kamazats's name. They would offer blood, sometimes their own, drawn with obsidian blades, spilled onto bark paper and burned, the smoke curling toward the underworld in offering. Blood was not horror in this world. It was currency. It was memory. It was the bridge between gods and humans, between Xibalba and the earth above. To invoke Kamazots was not simply to seek death. It was to ask for clarity, for transition, for the ending of what had lingered too long. He was a god of pruning, of finality, of clean edges. His breath was the wind at your neck in the deepest part of the cave. His voice was the silence after. A name is called and not returned. His body was shadow without source. And yet not all feared him. To the initiated, to the priest who walked barefoot into the ceremonial cavern, Kamazots was a guide. He kept the line between the worlds clear. He ensured that what entered Xibalba did not return unchanged, or at all. Without him, the veil would fray. The balance would tip. In the stillness of the jungle night, when the fires have died and the stars press close overhead, Kamazots still waits. Not because he must, but because that is what he is. He is the weight of endings, the shape of silence. And when you walk too far into the dark, when the air turns cold and you forget which way leads home, it is his wings you hear first, and you will not hear them twice. There are places where the sun has never been. Far beneath the jungle canopy, beyond the reach of birdsong and green light, the limestone earth gives way to long corridors of breathless dark. The Maya called them Sakbib white roads. But these were not paths for feet. They were the veins of the underworld, connecting the surface to the layered domains of the dead, where gods and spirits moved like wind across water. In such spaces, Kamazots did not dwell. He reigned. To understand the world of Kamazots, one must understand how the Maya saw time. It was not a line. It was not a march from beginning to end. It was a circle, a breath, a great wheel turning slowly beneath the stars. The underworld was not a punishment, not a place to fear, but a sacred passage complex, layered and necessary. Xibalba, the place of fright, was more than myth. It was mapped, named, measured in sacred texts. It held houses of trials, the house of knives, the house of cold, the house of jaguars, the house of bats. Each was a test, a refining fire. Kamazots presided over his house, as one might preside over a silent temple. His domain was not chaos. It was discipline, not rage but certainty. His silence was its own kind of sound. When priests entered the bat house in ritual or dream, they came not to flee, but to learn, to understand endings. Within Maya cities like Kopon, Palenque, and Tikal, stone temples were built atop older temples, as if memory itself required layers. Many had entranceways aligned with cave mouths, sacred cenotes, or stars tied to the calendar of sacrifice. And within these dark inner sanctuaries, rituals were performed beneath the stone-carved eyes of Kamazots. Some say initiates would lie still in the dark, arms folded, breath shallow, waiting for a dream or vision to descend. The silence would press in until the flutter of bat wings signaled presence. Not always literal, not always gentle. In those moments, Kamazots appeared not as a beast, but as a lesson. He showed death as a passageway, not a wall, the blade of transition. The mercy of letting go. To the Maya, blood was the most potent offering, not for cruelty, but for connection. It was how humans fed the gods, how the world was kept in balance. In painted codices and stelae, kings are shown drawing blood from their tongues. ears or thighs, allowing it to drip onto sacred bark paper before burning it. In the smoke, visions came. Spirits walked. Ancestors whispered. Camazotz, when honored, was never summoned with fire and noise. He was invoked with stillness, with the absence of sound, with the knowledge that fear is not to be defeated, but understood. In some carvings, Camazotz is shown holding a human heart, not as a trophy, but as an offering. In others, he appears beside the great bat tree, a mythical axis connecting the underworld to the heavens. Bats, after all, hung between sky and stone, night and earth. Just like time, just like death, the Maya calendar marked not just days but destinies. Certain dates were considered sacred to Camazotz. Days ruled by the power of night, endings, sacrifice. On such days, people refrained from travel, or lit extra incense, or offered prayers near cave mouths. These were not superstitions. They were agreements, understandings between the people and the powers that moved unseen. Over time, Camazotz became more than a figure of the cave. He became a keeper of transitions, a guardian of thresholds. Those on the edge of life, the dying, the grieving, the soon-to-be initiated, would whisper his name in the breath between silence, not loudly, not with fear, but with respect. He was not a god one begged from. He was a god one acknowledged. When a storm passed, or a king died, or a lineage ended, his wings were felt in the winds. His presence was understood in the sudden absence of sound, in the flutter of bats at twilight, in the cool hush before dawn. In certain versions of the hero twins story, Hunahpu's decapitated head is not destroyed but transformed, used. In another trial, placed upon a ball court, woven into the next part of the journey. This, too, is Camazotz, not the end, but the shape of change, the hand that closes one door so another can open, and still he waits. In modern times, the caves remain. Tourists sometimes visit the great bat caves of Belize, Guatemala, and southern Mexico. They bring flashlights and voices, breaking the silence with clicks and laughter. But if they stop, if they turn off the lights and let the dark settle, they may feel it. A pressure, a shape, not harmful, not welcome. Simply there, the bats overhead rustle slightly. The air grows damp. The cave seems deeper than before, not just in stone, but in meaning. That is the world Camazotz governs. Not the world of violence or horror, but of remembrance, of ceremony, of endings made sacred. He was never meant to terrify. He was meant to remind. Stories like rivers do not end. They disappear into the horizon, feeding something unseen. And so it is with Camazotz. Though temples crumble and languages sleep in stone, the bat god remains, not as a relic, but as a presence, subtle as breath behind your shoulder. He does not wander through the ruins of Tikal or Köpen like a ghost in search of worship. No, he waits in other places now, not physical, but remembered, in the quiet space between what has passed and what will come, in dreams, in art, in the edges of belief. Long after the last blood offerings were poured, Camazotz lingered in the imagination of the descendants of those who once shaped his temples. The oral stories carried by grandparents, whispered in the quiet hours before sleep, kept him alive in a different form, perhaps no longer as the decapitating god of Xibalba, but as something just as deep. The embodiment of night's hidden truths dot in these stories. The bat is no longer just a creature. It is a symbol of vigilance, of boundaries, of what lies beyond comfort. The farmer, hearing rustling at dusk, might pause and look skyward, and in that pause the spirit of Camazotz passes by. The cave at the edge of the village might remain undisturbed, not out of superstition, but out of memory. Camazotz becomes a guardian of silence, a lesson wrapped in wings. As modernity grew around these stories, with roads cutting through forests, with lights chasing away shadows, with noise covering the breath of the dark, Camazotz adapted, not in form, but in meaning. He became the warning in the noise, the stillness we rarely hear anymore, the truth that something ancient always listens, even if we've forgotten how to speak its name. In the 20th century, Camazotz would experience something strange, recognition from far away. Scholars, archaeologists, and mythologists, uncovering fragments of Maya belief, began to piece him back together. In dusty libraries, on museum plaques, in faded codices, the god of the House of Bats was mentioned once more. But this kind of mention is different from invocation. Camazotz is not a concept. He is not a symbol for study. He is what happens when the lights go out and you feel the weight of something older than words settle into the room. Artists return to him. Writers, musicians, in fictional tales, he became a villain, a guardian, a shadow with purpose. Some imagined him reborn in cities, flying over dark alleys. Others placed him back into the jungles, resting in temples waiting to be found. But through it all, something remained the same. His shape did not change. A humanoid bat, large, red-eyed, blade-like features. Still, watching, he entered comics, graphic novels, and reinterpretations. Some associated him with vampires, others with demons, but to those who remembered his true name, the truth was simpler. Camazotz is not evil. He is not good. He is necessary. A line must be kept between life and death, between order and chaos, between the known and the unknowable. Camazotz is the guardian of that line. His House of Bats was not meant to punish, but to prepare, and perhaps that is why he was feared, because preparation for death is rarely comfortable, because to pass through Xibalba is to face parts of yourself you have buried too deep. Because Camazotz offers no platitudes, only the truth. Today the caves still breathe. In parts of Central America, bat colonies gather in their thousands, wings brushing the air with ancient rhythm. Children hear stories about cave spirits and creatures of the night. Elders leave small offerings near stones that no one remembers. Why they matter? Only that they do dot in the jungle night. The calls of howler monkeys fade, replaced by the flap of unseen wings. And there, in the pause, Camazotz still lingers. He is not worshipped, but he is not forgotten. To meet him, you do not need to travel far. You only need to sit still in the dark and listen, not for noise, but for the moment when all noise stops, for the shift in the air that signals something present. That is where Camazotz waits. At the threshold, with wings folded, and a blade always ready, not to harm, but to cut the path. Conclusion. Camazotz was never meant to be chased. He is not the kind of god who arrives with thunder or fire. He does not claim temples or kingdoms. He needs no throne. His domain is smaller, tighter, closer. He lives in the moment just before something ends, in the space between the last breath and the first silence. For the ancient Maya, Kamazats was not a villain. He was not evil. He was necessary. He belonged to a world where gods kept balance, where death was part of the rhythm, not a rupture. And in that world, Kamazats was the keeper of clean endings, of final truths, of sacred transitions. He was the god who stood at the edge of all things, not pushing, not pulling, simply holding. The lion, a guardian of night, a teacher of stillness. In modern retellings, he may appear monstrous, bat-winged and crimson-eyed, but that is not who he truly was. Kamazats is not fear. He is the shape that fear takes when we finally look at it without. Running, he is the soundless presence that helps us let go. He is the dark we pass through, not because we must, but because we are ready. In every story of his, there is a moment when the noise stops, when the fire dims, when a figure moves in the dark, calmly, with the weight of something timeless behind. That figure is not the end. It is the beginning of what comes after. Kamazats does not ask to be remembered loudly. His name can be whispered or left unspoken. He does not require belief, only stillness. And if you find yourself at a threshold between one chapter and the next, between what was and what waits, you may feel him, not in terror, not in pain, but in the cool hush of understanding that the God of the final breath does not rush. He waits, and he is waiting still.